It started with Beatrice Sloan standing at the edge of my driveway, her neon vest glowing like a warning flare and her voice booming through a bullhorn as if she were commanding an army. She pointed at my cabin with the same authority you'd expect from a general leading troops into battle, shouting that my refusal to join her precious community association was a crime against unity. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some openly filming from their porches, and then, as if summoned by fate, Sheriff Alvarez's cruiser rolled slowly down the gravel road. He leaned on the hood, adjusted his hat, and asked in that calm, gravelly voice of his, "What's this circus about now?" Beatrice shoved a clipboard at him with a triumphant smirk. She thought this was her moment. But when I handed over the folded deed I had carried in my jacket pocket for years, the sheriff's laugh echoed louder than her bullhorn. He raised the paper high enough for everyone to see and said words that froze the entire street in its tracks. "Lady, you just called me out here to evict yourself. This man owns the whole reservoir." Phones dropped, gasps swept the crowd, and Beatrice's face drained to the color of chalk. But to understand how we reached that moment, you have to rewind back to quieter mornings when the lake was still. Just mine. Before the empire of clipboards and bylaws tried to sink their teeth into it. My grandfather had built the cabin decades ago, hammering the beams with his own calloused hands. The dock was older than most of the houses in the neighborhood, that had since sprouted up on the opposite side of the water. For me, mornings were coffee steaming on the porch, ducks gliding lazily across the rippling surface, and the silence of pines whispering with the wind. That was my life until Beatrice marched up with her laminated badge swinging like she'd been elected president of a small country. She demanded my signature on her bylaws, a stack of papers thicker than a Bible. I told her calmly my family's land predated her entire development, and that the water she was trying to regulate had been deeded to us in 1912. She reacted as if I'd confessed to treason. Her heels stabbed gravel like war drums as she stormed away, vowing she'd handle it. I should have known then that peace was over. The next morning, a notice was nailed to my gate. A $1,500 fine for failing to mow my shoreline grass. The hilarious part was that my shoreline was nothing but cattails, reeds, and wildflowers untouched and thriving since before her subdivision existed. I ignored it. The following day, 3 board members showed up with notebooks and cameras, pacing along my fence line like inspectors at a crime scene. They whispered, scribbled, and snapped photos of my pickup truck as though documenting evidence. I raised my coffee in salute, turned up the grill, and whistled loudly enough for them to hear. Their faces burned crimson with outrage. By day 3. Beatrice herself returned, this time brandishing a new violation. "Unauthorized dock usage," she declared, slapping the fine sheet against my chest. $5,000. I almost spilled my coffee laughing. "Go ahead," I told her. "Call the sheriff. He fishes here more than I do." She smirked, her eyes glittering with a thrill of power, and hissed, "We'll see about that." Less than half an hour later, sirens wailed down the road. Neighbors poured out like it was a holiday parade, phones raised high to catch my downfall. Beatrice strutted at the center, announcing that she would finally prove no one was above the rules. The sheriff stepped out, took one look at the scene, and shook his head. He didn't even bother hiding his exasperation. She waved the clipboard in his face, rattling off violations until he silenced her with a raised palm. Then he turned to me, asked for my deed, and after a glance, bellowed the line that would echo across the neighborhood. "Lady, you just called me to evict yourself. He owns the lake." The crowd erupted in gasps and muffled laughter. Beatrice's jaw fell open. For the first time she had no words, but silence was never her strength. That evening, she gathered her board in her garage, passing out donuts and fiery speeches. Through gossip and open windows I heard it all. She claimed the sheriff had been tricked, that my deed was outdated, that I was a fraud exploiting legal loopholes. Her loyalists nodded like toy soldiers. The next morning, I found 3 more notices in my mailbox, violations for everything from my docks, aesthetic noncompliance, to parking my truck in my own driveway. One even claimed I had endangered wildlife. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the stack into the lake. Still, Beatrice wasn't finished. That night, she marched down the street with a bullhorn, shouting that an emergency meeting would be held to deal with the lake intruder. The garage filled with folding chairs and whispers, her voice booming, about safety and property values. Some neighbors rolled their eyes, others cheered her on. By sunrise, a mob of 10 appeared at my fence armed with rulers, clipboards, and one poor soul lugging a laser level. "This is an inspection," Beatrice barked. I leaned on the gate and asked if they had a warrant. Their silence was priceless. "Better write up those ducks too," I said, pointing at the reeds where a family splashed. Neighbors chuckled. Even some in her mob laughed. Beatrice's face flared red, her authority cracking in real time. I decided to have a little fun. Sprinklers rigged at the fence line. A recording of bullfrog croaks set on motion sensors. A fake "Beware of Beavers" sign hung by the dock. The next inspection squad returned in force, only to be soaked, startled, and filmed by half the neighborhood as one slipped into a mud puddle. By the time the sheriff's cruiser rolled by, he was chuckling too. "You've got the patience of a saint," he said, driving off as Beatrice screamed about biological warfare. But embarrassment only sharpened her rage. Within a week, glossy flyers hit every mailbox, the first annual HOA Lake Festival, scheduled on my shoreline, with my dock listed as the centerpiece venue. The arrogance was staggering. On the day of the event, SUVs lined the road, food trucks parked on my grass, a band set up in my clearing. Beatrice wore a sash reading HOA President and strutted like royalty. Children ran across my dock as though it were a carnival ride. I sipped iced tea, waiting. When the sheriff's cruiser arrived, lights flashing, she greeted him with false cheer and declared into her bullhorn, "Law enforcement is here to keep our festival safe." He let her ramble before raising my deed high again. "Folks," he boomed, "you've been misled. This entire shoreline is private property. You're trespassing." Gasps rippled across the crowd. Vendors shouted for refunds. Parents yanked children away. The festival collapsed in chaos. Beatrice's voice cracked as she screamed lies into her bullhorn, but no one listened. The sheriff leaned close and warned her, "Wrap this up before I start writing citations." Her bullhorn clanged to the ground, a metallic sound of defeat. Most people would have stopped there. Not Beatrice. She filed a lawsuit thicker than a phone book, accusing me of fraud, endangerment, even harboring dangerous wildlife. The courthouse was a circus. Beatrice arrived with half her board, all in neon vests, binders stacked high. She shouted, waved photographs, and tried to turn the hearing into a rally. The judge, known for her patience, lost it after 15 minutes. "Do you have a single shred of evidence?" she demanded. Beatrice stammered, flipping laminated bylaws until the judge cut her off. "Private association rules don't override legal deeds. The spirit of community is not enforceable law, ma'am." The gallery erupted in laughter. Case dismissed, prejudice stamped. Beatrice stormed out, reporters swarming her with cameras. I held up my deed, smiling, letting the truth speak louder. Then her hysteria. By then, the HOA's credibility had crumbled. Vendors demanded refunds. Neighbors questioned why they were paying dues to fund Beatrice's delusions. Board members quietly resigned, but still, she refused to retreat. One night, she and 2 allies crept onto my shoreline with shovels, trying to cement buoys into the lake. The sheriff's headlights caught them mid-act. They shrieked as deputies confiscated their tools. Another time, she staged a pathetic protest, with handmade signs. By then, neighbors filmed her tantrums and added meme captions online. Even loyalists peeled away. But her obsession burned hotter. Her final stunt came with lumber and drills. She attempted to build an HOA community dock on my property, planting a flag at the end. When the sheriff arrived, he didn't laugh this time. He pulled out a thick file, original deeds verified with the county clerk, proving my grandfather had secured exclusive rights generations ago. He handed eviction notices to Beatrice and her board, one by one. Their faces drained. Neighbors cheered. One board member ripped off his neon vest and tossed it into the water. Beatrice screamed conspiracies until the sheriff warned that one more outburst would end with her in cuffs. That night, as deputies dismantled her half-built dock, the sheriff sipped coffee on my porch and muttered, "Never seen anyone so willing to burn down their own house just to prove they were right." I nodded, because I knew he was right. Peace returned slowly. Neighbors waved again. The lake's silence crept back. Beatrice became a ghost, glimpsed only behind the wheel of her SUV, muttering to herself. But I couldn't resist one final touch. I built a monument, not a dock, not a fence, but a mailbox taller than any house in the neighborhood. Painted bright blue, it bore the words Beatrice's Rules upside down in white letters. Neighbors flocked to see it, laughing, snapping photos. Some called it art, others called it justice. Even the sheriff stopped by, posed for a picture, and said it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen on duty. For a while, people thought that was the end. But Beatrice's obsession still burned. She wasn't content to sulk behind curtains. She went to the media, sitting across from a news anchor with her neon vest still on, accusing me, the sheriff, and even the judge of corruption. Viewers laughed. Callers mocked her live on air. Within hours, the internet had crowned her Clipboard Karen, a meme that spread far beyond our town. And yet, she found one last desperate foothold. She filed a petition with the county commissioner, demanding the reservoir be declared public land under HOA oversight. Somehow, she got her rant listed on the agenda. The meeting was packed. She marched to the podium like it was a throne, shouting about unity, waving bylaws until papers scattered to the floor. When my lawyer stood, he dismantled her in 2 minutes. Flat, deed raised high, sheriff's reports laid bare. The commissioner denied her motion permanently. The chamber erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled headlines. Beatrice stumbled out, red-faced cameras flashing, her clipboard hanging limp at her side, but no one followed. Her army was gone. That evening I returned to my porch as the sun burned gold over the reservoir. Ducks floated lazily. Neighbors waved. For the first time in months, I felt peace, not just silence, but the kind of peace that comes when the truth finally drowns out the lies. Still, I built one last monument. On the rise above the water, I hung a massive iron bell salvaged from an old church my grandfather had dismantled. Across its face I painted, "Freedom from fines." Every evening at sunset, I rang it once. Its sound rolled across the reservoir, deep and resonant. Neighbors stepped out to listen. Children clapped. Even the sheriff tipped his hat and said, "That's one sound Beatrice can't silence." And that's when I realized this fight was never just mine. It was everyone's who had lived under her clipboard, fined, bullied, or humiliated. The bell wasn't just a victory, it was a legacy. A reminder that tyranny crumbles, truth endures, and sometimes the best revenge is simply letting absurdity collapse under its own weight. Even now, sometimes I see her SUV creeping past, her lips moving silently as if she's still arguing with herself, but her voice doesn't matter anymore. The sheriff was right. Fools burn loudest before they fall. And Beatrice Sloan had burned herself into ashes. Now, when I sit with my coffee on the porch, the ducks gliding across the water, the laughter of neighbors drifting in the breeze, I know the truth. The lake was always mine, but the victory that belonged to all of us.